Boom. Boom. With one's with confidence. Now it says I'm live. So boom. Welcome to Tokyo Tonight. My name is Hiko Simon. According to that, I am now live. It's good to see. Even on Boxing Day, I guess a lot of the people in America and that sort of Western Hemisphere are waking up at the moment to what we call Boxing Day in New Zealand, the 26th of December. I hope everybody had a good Christmas. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Honestly, I know it's kind of sensitive nowadays and you're supposed to say happy holidays, but it was never a religious, or, where I grew up, it was, it was a holiday, which is not in Japan, of course, although we're lucky it fell on a weekend this year, but that was actually part of, and you know what, I just realized I don't think I added this in the topics, but there was a news story about why do Japanese celebrate Christmas even though they're not Christians? And for the same reason everybody else celebrates Christmas, even though, most people don't go to church every week and, aren't Christians. It's a great holiday, although Japanese have, of course, taken their own take on it. But, Japanese like a party, and who doesn't? So I hope that, however you celebrated, if you celebrated, that you had a good weekend. Very quiet one here, of course. No going out, got some turkey, got some, got some food and whatnot, some cake. One thing that Japan actually does improve on Christmas, at least where I'm from, is Christmas cake. Christmas cake is, more something that is endured than eaten. It's like a Christmas cake, of course. Again, where I grew up is the equivalent of osechiriori. It's like the preservative. It's designed to last a long time and save people from having to cook rather than actually be good. And in Japan, that's also chiriori that they have at New Year's. It's the sort of all the preserved food, which mostly tastes terrible. In Japan, because they don't have that tradition for Christmas. When they say Christmas cake, they just have like cream. It's like cream shortcake and strawberries on top and stuff. And I had a little bit of that. Had some cake. Had some, nothing too big. But nice quiet day. I was thinking about watching Die Hard, but then the lad was watching Home Alone and watched that. And actually, last night, I must admit, I watched Don't Look Up on Netflix. Which I quite enjoyed. Seems to split opinions. Some people actually don't like it because it cuts a bit too close to the bone, which it certainly does. It is really idiocracy, except set in the present day, or Wag the Dog, except it's, on the one hand, it's ridiculous and stupid, as it is supposed to be. On the other hand, it is a little bit too real, but it is quite well done and funny, but awful and pretty hard to watch at times, just because it's so shows us how what a crazy time we are in. But sounds like people traveling at the moment are struggling quite a bit. My family, my mum in Australia, drove down to Melbourne. It takes 2 days from Brisbane, but given all the flights and everything being cancelled right now, sounds pretty intense actually everywhere. Like Omicron. And even the idea that it's a lighter, easier version that everyone should just catch doesn't actually see. I'm seeing stuff which says that isn't the case either, although it is definitely spreading like crazy. It has only just started here in Japan. We just had our first community spread cases this week. We are getting like 50 cases of it a day in immigration being caught in quarantine, but in the community, people who have not traveled overseas, it's only a handful of cases still. But there are now cases confirmed in Okinawa, Kyoto, Osaka, Nagoya, and Tokyo. So it's going to start, unfortunately. So we are really going into the next wave. The numbers, by the way, are up from about like mid-20s every day to like nearly 40 every day. So it's gone up like 1.5 times over the last week. Still very, very small numbers. But that curve, which takes a long time to overcome, that is starting. So we are just, we're about to deal with that. But I'm glad that we got through this period at least without it. I've still got one more week of work. That's the Japan way. But John-san just finished watching Die Hard. Well, good. Well done there, John-san. It is a great Christmas movie, and I was about to go watch it, but instead I must admit, it's fun being able to watch a movie like Home Alone with a lad, and for him to be able to sit through and enjoy the whole thing, which he did. He laughed like crazy. It's really a human, real life version of Tom and Jerry. It's another great movie, although maybe in a couple of years' time, I'll show him Die Hard. How are we all doing here? Quint Rankit, One Johnson, fire. Good to see you in here. And again, thanks for joining. I just thought, well, I think this every week, but I really thought just because it's Christmas, I thought I might just rip through the topics tonight. But there again, there's a little bit to talk about, and I never succeeded at it anyway, so we'll see how we go. But Quint Rankit, Discussion of software patents. I was talking about that on Twitter today when there's the idea of Japan doing what apparently UK does and some other countries do of having secret patents. And I don't doubt that these things exist in patents which are, of national security interest, so they are allowed to have a patent, but they're not allowed to be published. Just as someone who deals with law day to day, I don't understand how that works. I'm sure it does work. I'm sure there is a way that it works, but I just don't get it. The nature of a patent is that if you invent something, in exchange for declaring to the world the thing that you invented, you get a certain time period where you can demand licenses or prevent other people from capitalizing on the same invention that you made. It's like you get bagsies on it. And of course, if that patent is secret, then how can you enforce it against other people? And the government said they'll compensate people for lost licenses. But again, if that's the case, then is it really a patent? So it's a little bit mysterious to me, but it is a thing, and I understand I had people telling me, oh, it's a thing, which I'm sure it is. But yeah, so that's about as far as I can go. Software patents, by the way, I don't know if that's even part of that at all. Software patents are, of course, a lot more difficult, and although I have a legal background, really only very superficially around the patent area, I did my first job actually ever in Japan was actually at a patent law firm, now that I think about it, although I worked in the trademarks team, which is a lot easier. But yes, PB, we have liftoff indeed. Gene, boom. Tai Nakamura, boom. Great to see you. Merry Christmas, dude. We've got Black Tengu, Merry Christmas. Good to see the Greek representative checking in. Good to see you. Scoffing a mince pie, nice. I didn't know you could even get mince pies in Greece. That is good to see. Please continue with the meat pie. Date night, definitely no date night. I'm married. No date nights for you or for me. Merry Christmas indeed. Have a happy new year, everybody. The Pagan Solstice Festival. Yes, we just had solstice yesterday or day before yesterday. So from now on, the days get longer. Although we are having a real cold snap at the moment. Tokyo, sorry, the rest of Japan. Tokyo is sunny and not as cold as everywhere else because it's Tokyo. We're sheltered by mountains and we have fantastic winters here relative to everywhere else. If you're elsewhere in Japan right now, don't go outside. They're warning people that last year they had a massive snowstorm that caught a bunch of people in their cars on the highways, and pretty horrible. Yeah, they're saying to people, please do not go outside for the next couple of days if you don't need to, and if you do, take survival supplies in your car because you never know. So yeah, but we're all good here, definitely. Devoid, good morning, good to see you. We've got one Johnson literally just finished watching Dada. It's just said that. And so what's the bad news about Omicron? I'm just reading a thread from Melbourne who's talking, he's retweeting an epidemiologist explaining how Omicron is actually worse than Delta, apart from the fact that it's obviously a heap more contagious. The suggestion is it's going to reach more people who Delta would not have reached, and is going to expand the blast scope. As well as people who haven't had a chance to be again, I was just reading through a thread which just said it's not to be taken lightly. A lot of people are taking it lightly, and I don't know what to believe. I'm basically not, I'm staying at home pretty much, although I must admit I have been going into the office, and I'm probably going to stop that just with the numbers going up, but maybe just through the end of the year anyway, probably one more time. Anyway, Son Loves Home Alone. Yeah, it's a great movie. Dan H, great to see you. Aaron, great to see you. National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Oh, that is a great one. Actually, yeah, there's so many. I'm trying to think. The European Vacation one is also excellent as well. Chevy Chase, but yeah, the Christmas Vacation is also there. Those are classic ones. Yeah, we've got Quentin Rankid. How do I describe a software patent without potentially violating it? I don't think the problem's describing it. Well, again, maybe you're going deep into an area that I haven't fully thought out. I know that you can think of algorithmic. There are certain types of software patents that are theoretically possible, but yeah. I mean, as someone who used to do software, you can describe software without actually showing, key parts of it. But yeah, I don't know how that works exactly. Dan H, with the glut of milk, has it lowered prices of and made butter cheaper? No, it has not, and people are complaining about that. But I will be talking about that. Don't you know it? Cobras Teshi, good to see you. No, we're just doing the greetings. So glad that you made it. Welcome. Nice to see. Nice to have our German representative. If you are in the chat, as always, please say hello. It's always nice to see where people are checking in from. I do appreciate, wow, so many people showing up in spite of it being the day after Christmas, where I guess if you are not celebrating or doing something, you'd normally be passed out. So it's great to see everybody in here. Do say hello. Remember, if you want to get my attention, you can see what all the other people did. Just if you say my name with the correct spelling, you don't even have to mark it, actually. Just say Hiko Simon and it will flash orange. And if it does that after each story, I will go back through the comments. And if you've got a comment for me or a question for me or a request for a topic or anything, that's how you get my attention, and I will do my best to pay attention that way. So yeah, why don't we dive into the topics? We'll see how my ambition to do a shorter show goes. One thing is, it is like 30% humidity at the moment. Don't know if that will show up. 30%. That is really dry. That is really dry. I would have the humidifier on, except it'll make an enormous noise, so I'm going to turn it on after. But that is the other thing with winter. It's like the Sahara Desert here at the moment. That's really, I mean, below 30 is like crazy, but 30 is super dry. So anyway, boom, into the topics. First thing, this is kind of random. I just found this at the start of the week. And you know what? I've never retweeted Elon Musk before. But I thought this was interesting. I was reading it and it was interesting, so I shared it, and other people shared it as well. And cognitive biases. And it's so funny because when people talk about things like not wanting subconscious bias to be taught in schools, because it's, or even critical race theory, stuff like that. In the end of the day, what those things are really about are about cognitive biases, or at least one form of that. And what that's about is it's empowering people by saying, you might not realize that, people naturally just get through culture, through, human biology, just have certain tendencies to assume things and to behave certain ways. And, that is what that is. But at least if you're self-aware about them, you can correct them. And it's there's a great list, there's and these are things that, you talk about all day. You presume that, better moral standing happens due to a positive outcome. Worse moral standing happens due to a negative outcome. People generally judge that they won because they were right, or whatever, and people who lost because they were wrong, or something like that. That kind of assumption, for example. Groupthink assumptions. Spotlight effect. We overestimate how much people are paying attention to our behavior and our appearance. I mean, some of these things are sort of obvious. But you add them all up, and there are actually some really, really great ones here, which you think if there's a human capable of realizing all of these at the same time, you can actually eliminate a lot of the grounds that people make mistakes. It's a fantastic list. If you just look up Elon Musk, cognitive biases, or this, it's a really good list. So anyway, I shared that. I thought that was interesting. Into the comments, I see we've got the J-Vlog checking, and good to see you, salutations. We've also got Sergeant Bilko, ho 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 indeed, Merry Christmas, to at least our representative pretty close to the reputed North Pole. Lucky I'm not in the middle of that fight between the Finns and the Norwegians over the ownership of that, but yes. I didn't have time to organize around the stories, but this is a big one. The Prime Minister has called on Japan to patriotically drink more milk because, like a drunken driver trying to stay straight on a straight road, the milk producers have gone from not producing enough and having butter shortages and rationing to overproducing, and now we have too much milk, and the government is begging people to to purchase and drink more milk because there is an oversupply. Which is fine, but people are pointing out that it's actually what's with the oversupply, but it's not any cheaper. The government's just basically begging us to pay farmers stuff when they're not actually making it cheaper to sell more. The reason for the shortage, for the oversupply, by the way, is not that the cows have suddenly started producing more. It's that most companies and cafeterias and so on have been closed down. And so most of the places that would normally buy milk or milk products or whatever have not been buying them. So the normal supplies are not getting consumed the same way. There's less dairy is getting consumed through, industrial, through workplaces and so on. And so there's a bunch of it just spare. And so in a way that's because of COVID, and it's not really, I can't really blame the oversupply on bad management by the farmers. Although I would point out that, again, just like with the butter, if Japan just engaged in free trade with dairy products, they could just adjust. and they wouldn't have the oversupply problem. And certainly, if there was free trade, then there would actually be cheaper milk, and people would probably be drinking it more naturally without being told by the Prime Minister to drink it as a national duty. Why aren't they making more butter out of it? Well, they could, but it's actually not that necessary. The oversupplies of raw milk, which people tell me on Twitter, cannot in itself be used for milk or cheese. Apparently you have to process it or do something like that with it. I'm not going out of my way to drink more milk at the moment. It just strikes me as another example of poor management of agriculture in Japan, and why free markets really could do a better job. However, that said, one thing, probably Lawson trying to do a job of showing the government that they're on side. This is good news. Japan convenience store Lawson to sell half-price hot milk over New Year to stop waste. So that's some good news. And actually, I must admit, and by the way, I'm allergic to milk. For all of my complaining about butter and so on, I have a mild allergy. Honestly, I drink cafe lattes, I eat chocolate, all that stuff. In fact, I barely actually even notice that I have cereal with milk. When I was a kid and I was diagnosed, and it was seen as aggravating asthma, which I had as a kid, we went through the soy milk and all that sort of stuff, and didn't really like that stuff at all. And there were concerns I wasn't getting enough calcium as a kid because I was sort of avoiding it. And whenever I get sick, I'd avoid cheese and dairy products. But honestly, nowadays, it just doesn't affect me at all. So there is that. But so I've come around to the point that I must admit, if they're selling, like, I guess the only thing is that if I go to the convenience store, I'm getting cafe lattes. So if they're making cafe lattes like half price, I'm like there. And I'd hope that 7-Eleven and Family Mart do the same thing. If they're just selling hot milk, I'm almost like, okay, give me the hot milk, I'll pour some coffee into it or do something like that. Well, the milk itself is just going to make you sleepy. I don't really understand why they would just sell milk that way. But even then, I mean, I suppose you could put like chocolate or something into it and actually put some Milo into it. Damn, I'd be all over that if it weren't for the fact I was working this week anyway. So I do actually think that's at least Lawson seems to be doing something good there. I hope they're getting the milk cheap. But that's a thing that's happening. Into the comments, Quinn Rankett, I don't think that's quite what's being taught in the schools under the rubric of CRT. Well, I think people think that CRT is about saying that white people are horrible, and I don't think it's quite that. It's quite as simplistic as people who are against it think that it is. Certainly, again, I've been through and even participated in giving not CRT, and honestly, I don't fully even understand how that debate is suddenly such a problem. But the thing on subconscious bias training, for example, this is subconscious bias training. That's what we do, and it's not just about sexism and racism. It's about everything. It's about in-group bias, out-group bias. Tendency to look at certain people as being more credible than others and all that sort of thing, and being self-aware of those assumptions that people make and make sure that you're self-correcting or accounting for them. I do that all the time, and I think that stuff is cool. But Quinn Rankid, not lactose intolerance, just a general. It just came up when in New Zealand, something at least in my day, New Zealand has the highest asthma rate in the world. It's kind of funny, I guess. Maybe too much nature, people reacting to it. But we had allergy tests done when I was diagnosed with asthma. It's like nearly 50% of the population or something has mild asthma as kids. Just lots of pollen, lots of things to be allergic to. And it came up that milk was a trigger for me just for asthma. But that said, I mean, it was never that big a deal, and I drink it straight now. I've got no problems with it at all. But yeah, it came up when I was a kid. Yeah, milk is supposed to be inflammatory, says Black Tango. Indeed. Well, humans had to learn to drink milk from other animals, from cows, but we adapted pretty well. But of course, there are cultures, including in Japan, that didn't have so many cows around and so much dairy, that are not as adapted as European and cultures that have had them around for longer. So yeah, super interesting. By the way, all of this reminds me, I was actually just after I picked the topics, but before I started the show, I actually didn't add the video, but I was watching a video tonight by Maizawa, the head of Zozotown, who just went and spent a week on the International Space Station. Actually he spent like 15 days on the International Space Station on the Russian module, and he just came back to Earth. But while he was in space, he recorded a bunch of videos that he is now posting on YouTube. And I don't know, if you're into space, you should watch them. And it's so funny. He's like most Japanese guys I've ever worked with. He's like the same age as me. He talks like Japanese people that I know. And he did a great video tonight, which I watched just before the show, which you should go check out his channel and watch it. It's just interesting. But it's like, of all the people who go into space and talk about like mundane things about being in space, you could tell he's Japanese. He did a video tonight on how did it affect his libido while he was in space. How did weightlessness affect that? And, one thing I like about Japanese people is, it is a cultural adaptation that Japanese are just, generally speaking, you have to be careful. Among friends, not among strangers, but among friends, Japanese are much more frank and open, I find, about just like, almost like they talk about sex and things related to sex, like mowing the lawn. And why not? Why not? Hey, if you're having stomach cramps lately or you twisted your leg, what's the difference between that and, something related to that? There's something about Japanese culture. But anyway, so they were asking, so he actually spent a video saying that apparently he says that he still wakes up with morning wood every day, like normally. Congratulations to him. He pointed out this didn't happen the whole time he was in space. Didn't happen once. And he talked about how it affects the blood flow. Says he hopes it'll go back to normal when he gets back to Earth. Hasn't been too embarrassed to talk about it with all the other astronauts so far. But he just talked about that at length, just really matter-of-factly, and it's actually really interesting. And again, it's just something which, like if you're hanging out drinking with Japanese dudes, they'll just talk about that stuff like it's normal, which when you think about it, it's weird for it not to be treated as normal. Western culture has too many hang-ups. So I actually, it's just really cool. And you can tell it's a Japanese billionaire in space. Just they talk about different things. Quentin Rankin, you know a guy whose grandchild asked him if he was evil because he was white. That's what's being taught in schools. Thank you for the link, Aaron. And like I say, it's all in Japanese. I don't think there are subtitles, but like I say, it's just to me it was like, whoa, it really hit home. Oh, now it's a Japanese guy in space. Like this is what Japanese dudes hanging out talking about space would talk about, which I've never heard a conversation like that before. Which, when you think about it, it's strange. So, thank you very much for sharing the link. Kerberos Tenchi finds him annoying. Well, I guess he's rich enough. He probably doesn't care. I don't know him that well. I respect what he's doing, and he's actually done a lot of things around this as well. So personally, I like him, but of course, each to their own. You don't have to like the guy, certainly. I don't know. I mean, that's harsh. If that's what's happening, then that's nuts. By the way, Quentin Ranked, that certainly isn't what it should be. But I don't know. I'm so far away from. I'm so glad that I'm not in a place having that debate. I'm sure it's people with a lot of good intentions just doing dumb things. Anyway, next story. In Okinawa, it actually turned out, and this is partly understandable, this is one of the problems that's coming out with Omicron actually at the moment, is that a lot of people, the whole reason we started the whole passport, the vaccine passport thing, is that if you had proof that you're vaccinated, it's like you're good, and if you're not, you have to be tested. It's sort of become the way that we've been handling COVID, at least up until the end of Delta. Of course, the problem with Omicron is that it seems like a lot of vaccinated people are totally getting it. And so the idea that if you're vaccinated and if you can prove that you're vaccinated, you don't need to worry about getting tested. People will just assume that you're safe and let you in. You can go back to the movie theaters and you can go back traveling and whatnot. And so apparently, kind of based probably on that sort of logic and assumption, all U.S. military personnel coming into Japan for the last more than a year, actually, since when? A long time, but there is currently a couple of major clusters, including one of 223 people in Camp Hansen in Okinawa. Americans who have been coming into Japan, military personnel who have been coming in through the bases, have not been being tested because they've all been vaccinated. It's a requirement within the military that they be vaccinated to travel. I remember I saw some stories of some crazy military people refusing, resigning because they thought it was oppressing their freedoms or their political beliefs, forcing them to get vaccinated, even though they took shots for chemical warfare preparation in Iraq and everywhere else. But they're all vaccinated, which is great. But nonetheless, they're still catching Omicron like crazy. and they're coming into the bases, and apparently these are the only people able to get into Japan without tests, including Japanese people at the moment. So apparently the Japanese Prime Minister is furious. The Okinawan governor has demanded a base curfew, and I think Camp Hansen did have a curfew, but in spite of the curfew, well, apart from the fact all the other bases are not in curfew, just the bases with the cluster outbreaks at the moment. Apparently there was an incident where there was a hit and run case involving a drunk U.S. personnel from Camp Hansen who was arrested by local police and was like riding around without a motorcycle, ran someone over, was drunk and breaching the camp curfew. So kind of not great PR for the US military in Japan at the moment. Again, as a military brat myself, I'm definitely not anti-military, but at the same time, they should be doing better than this, and so it looks like they will make course corrections and they will be closing the bases for a while. But that caused some panic and some backlash, as if it was needed in a place like Okinawa against the base, the US bases there. PB, does space milk taste different? That one just jumped out at me. I don't know. It'd be super interesting. The funny thing about smell, by the way, or about taste, is that it's affected apparently a lot by noise and vibration. It's why stuff tastes different on an airplane, and why a lot of airlines in recent years have gotten kind of better at the science, and they've figured out that the reason a lot of food tastes bland on airplanes is the droning sound of airplanes actually affects and dulls the sense of taste. And a lot of airlines have figured out how to compensate for that when they flavor food, which is why airline food, at least if you're not flying a really terrible airline, certainly, if you fly on a really good airline like Singapore Airlines, the food is actually infinitely better than it was like 20 years ago, because they figured that science out. The funny thing about space stations is that they are, while space, of course, itself is a vacuum and is silent, and you don't have like those space swooshing noises like you get in the science fiction movies, at the same time, the space stations themselves, the things that are in space, contain heaps of vibrating, noisy equipment. Apparently so much so that the old Mir space stations were so noisy that the Russian cosmonauts had to wear like earmuffs to or have earplugs to be able to sleep. It's basically like being inside a really smelly, noisy submarine, like with clanging and droning noises, like all the sounds of the air pumps and the engines and everything are constantly going. And apparently they're actually incredibly noisy environments to be inside, apart from the fact that the air is also recycled and it smells terrible and it has all the BO. It's like every fart and BO like ever from anyone in the stations gets recycled, which again also made the final Russian space station apparently pretty tough to bear for the people who stayed in it. I don't know how the ISS is doing at the moment, but I imagine all of these things with the noise and the air and everything probably does affect how things taste up there, but they'll figure it out. But yes, anyway, back into further topics. NHK, for people who were worried about the pandemic, sent us something to take our minds off it for Christmas by posting a simulation of an earthquake. For some reason, they picked Tohoku for this. I mean, this could happen anywhere in Japan, but they picked one from Hokkaido and Tohoku, basically the same place as the last one, but a little bit further north, where they said, perfectly placed, another mega quake up here would kill 200,000 people. Along with tsunami simulations and everything else. And thanks NHK. That does take our mind off the pandemic. It is the thing with Japan. Basically, it's true anywhere on Earth, I suppose, to some extent, that we could be smited at any point, but particularly high probability here in Japan. And it is a reminder to be prepared. Unfortunately as well, these things always seem to happen when seasons change, or they seem particularly prone. So I couldn't imagine anything worse than having a major earthquake or a disaster like that happen in the middle of winter. But this is a time when you always have to make sure you've got a kit in the house ready, and frankly, not just if you're in Japan. But thanks NHK. I mean, if they're not doing Mount Fuji erupting, the funny thing with Mount Fuji, I mean, I've talked about this before, apart from the fact that it would be devastating when this thing erupts and it's overdue for an eruption. For Tokyo, it would the prediction is it would lead to 5 to 10 centimeters of ash over most of Tokyo, which doesn't sound so bad. It just sounds like a bit of snow or something like that. But apparently 5 centimeters of ash, if it gets wet, turns into like concrete, and you put that on top of power lines and roofs, and it would be enough to make most roofs on wooden structures collapse and to destroy power lines. it would make Tokyo no electricity, and it would de-roof most of the city, and it would be pretty awful, actually. Even with that, it would have a really major negative impact on Tokyo. Not to mention, of course, the major impact it would have in the actual prefectures where Mount Fuji is. So yeah, there's always stuff to worry about. So that is a thing. Quentin Rankett, don't they filter the air in some green way? Apparently not. It's one of those things about space stations. Yeah, I think 2001 was kind of good at painting this very sterile, silent, serene image of space. I think a lot of people who want to be astronauts aspire to it. It's kind of jarring when you hear accounts, again, of people like Mizawa. But certainly astronauts that come off and they talk about how it's like being inside. It sounds a lot more like Das Boot than it sounds like 2001: A Space Odyssey. Of course, Das Boot with fantastic views. They certainly didn't have that in the U-boats, but something like that. Anyway, yes. Hey, Dan H has got to go. Sorry to hear that, but have a fantastic Happy New Year, and see you again in the new year. Always appreciate you being there in the comments. Tokyo 503. Season's greetings to you. Have a Happy New Year there, Dan H. Certainly. PB, beans are banned on food on space stations. I imagine if they're not, they probably should be. Perhaps this is why we haven't had Mexican space stations yet. Maybe this has been the barrier. They've been trying to figure that one out. Who knows? But apparently it is a thing. It is a concern. Don't forget the ash on the roads. In Kagoshima, they have special machines to remove the ash. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. People, you don't think about it so much, but it is a thing that can happen. Annoying behaviors on trains. Are you ready to be on a train in Japan? Because people are judgmental. People on trains in Japan. The thing about being an oblivious foreigner enjoying traveling in Japan and breaking all 10 of these rules. Here's the thing. I don't think anyone, these things are basically like the social code, particularly in Tokyo, where no one says anything and the trains are dead silent. But you get dirty looks out the side of the eyes, and once you become attuned to those, it's kind of funny. Apparently, who was it? Was it JR did a survey? Japan Private Rail Association. So actually, that's the subways. Did a survey of passengers, 2,000 people, and got the ranking of most annoying behavior. So let's go through. How do we go through? Happy Kwanzaa, Shubas. Good to see you. Happy Boxing Day, indeed. So number 10, drinking and eating in crowded carriages. Even on non-crowded carriages, that's really a no-no in Tokyo. You can buy stuff at the kiosks and so on the train platform, and you might be able to quickly, get down a bit of bread or a chocolate bar or something on the platform. But once you get on the train, you're not supposed to eat on the train. The idea of people like spilling crumbs or chocolate flakes on people, like on a crowded train or whatever, it's inconsiderate. It causes smells. It's obnoxious. Of course, we've all seen the homeless person with a jar of sake drinking on the train and whatever, and it is horrible and it stinks. Don't do it. But there again, when people see that they're selling beer and chuhais and stuff at the kiosks, a lot of foreigners say, oh great, I'm going to have a beer and sit on the train and drink it because I can't do this anywhere else. But you really can't do it in Japan either. There's no rule against it, and they are selling the chuhais there on the platform. So I kind of get it. In fact, I think problems from that resulted in a lot of the kiosks no longer selling alcohol, but a lot of places you can get them. But certainly eating and drinking on trains is not cool, and don't do it. But certainly I know a lot of foreigners that do that. In fact, they revel in being able to do it when they come here, which is also kind of understandable, but it's obnoxious and you look like a gaijin smasher. Number 9, sound leaking from headphones. I probably am guilty of this. I do watch videos, I watch YouTube, I watch movies, and lately I've been watching The Expanse and The Orville, and I'm enjoying both of those. And I probably have the sound up too high because the trains get super noisy, but the sound does leak, and I don't like those in-ear earbuds. I do like the regular AirPods, so I'm sure it leaks, and I'm sure it annoys people. I've only been called out once. I've been told by someone, your earphones are too noisy, buddy. But yeah, I'm sure I annoy people with that. So I'm definitely guilty of number 9. Riding in a drunken state. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, right? Should you be driving instead? No, I mean, being on a train is the responsible thing. But certainly being a bad drunk on a train is the worst. Very rare that you see that. But, people who are passing out or unable to stand up properly or just thinking. It's kind of not cool, especially when, but again, this time of year, normal years anyway, not at the moment. You do impose yourself on other people a lot, so yeah, that's not a good look. Leaving garbage behind, leaving litter on trains, yeah, that gets me. Again, people often, less so now. It used to be when people would like read newspapers on the train. They'd buy it from the kiosk, read the newspaper on the train, and then they would leave it they'd leave the newspaper or the magazine on the top rack when they got off the train. And sometimes actually other people would like pick up newspapers from there, and it would become like a community newspaper. It kind of worked. This was something I used to see a lot on the Chuo line that went out to Hachioji, where I first lived in Tokyo. But nothing. If there's anything worse than eating on a train, it's eating and then leaving your garbage on the train. Again, the trains here are spotless, and so if you're that person who leaves a can on the floor, and then again, this is behavior typically you see from drunks, which you don't see very often. So all of these things stand out really negatively when it happens. Do not leave garbage behind, and definitely do not leave cans. We all know what it looks like when that can is rolling back and forth from the train braking and accelerating. Not good. Don't be that person. The way that they hold their luggage. It's funny, I've got a bag with me right here. The correct way, so the natural way that most people would wear a backpack, of course, is over the shoulder or behind you, or even like double slings and behind you, right? The problem with that is if you're on a really crowded train and you turn or whatever, you might accidentally knock a person over with your bag, like turning, or bump into people without realizing. But again, when everyone's trying to accommodate into a cramped space, having a bag behind you, like jutting out and causing people to be very to bend over backwards or whatever, or hitting them with your bag is pretty uncool. And the very first time, I think, when I was backpacking through Tokyo, I had a backpack and I was in the full backpack mode. I was all strapped in, and I had a massive bag on my back, and I remember I did do that. I turned a corner while I was on the train. Well, my friend shouted out to me, "Hey, go!" And I turned around, and I totally knocked someone over. So not cool. What you're supposed to do when you are on the train platform and you're waiting to get on the train is you move it to your front. So basically, like a baby. Basically, if you've got it around your arm, you can control where the bag is. You can see, you can make sure that you're not, jabbing people with it or anything like that. People ride trains with their bags on the front. The other thing, of course, is that if you're sitting down, never put the bag on the seat next to you. That's totally not cool. So that's the other thing. I mean, of course, sometimes people put their bags, just even when they're doing it right, people get annoyed sometimes. But at a minimum, keep your bag in front of you. And don't be obnoxious with it. Don't give it a place on a train. Smartphone use. Well, I'm guilty as hell of that. I mean, what else are you supposed to do if you ask me? Again, some people find it annoying. Some people find, I guess, the idea of people walking between trains, like with their heads down on their phones and bumping into people and whatever, not looking where they're going, that kind of thing, on crowded trains. Again, that's something that some people find annoying. At least that's how they responded on the survey. 4, this has probably become more sensitive, although you know what, same as last year, but last year was COVID pandemic as well. Coughing and sneezing on the train. At least, I must admit, when the pandemic started and when there were people like really coughing, like obnoxiously coughing on trains, I would actually get off and go to a different train carriage. I don't know how those trains do not turn into clusters. In fact, I'm sure that they probably have. It's just that it's kind of pointless trying to contact trace the Yamanote line. But there again, there's the other problem that when you're wearing the mask, or in winter when you're really crammed in and it's really humid or whatever, I would get my nose would start to get congested and I would need to blow my nose. But doing that on a train full of people, even when you need to, you have to sort of be discreet. You sort of have to hide it and wipe and not blow it until you get off the train, and do it discreetly. If you do that on a train, it's a pretty bad look, even in normal times, let alone during a pandemic. And that is when boarding and alighting. Yeah, this is a tough one as well, but the idea of people who get onto a train when there's a lot of people waiting to get on a train, and they stop as soon as they step on the train, not even thinking that there's a bunch of people behind them. And by the way, people, or not waiting for people to come off the train, or standing right in front of the doors when there are people piling out. The thing is, in a place like Tokyo, there are so many people, you're going to get jabbed or knocked over if you're in that situation, people find that very irritating when you are not being considerate of the people getting off the train or on the train, if you're not trying to let them past or whatever. But yeah, that's understanding, that's irritating. The way people sit in their seat, legs spreading, all that kind of thing. Cramming in when there's not enough rooms, falling asleep on people. That hasn't happened to me in a long time, but I've been living in central Tokyo for a long time. Yep. And the biggest nuisance on trains is talking loudly. Probably the biggest one that tourists are guilty of, especially in Tokyo. Trains are like libraries. And even talking in a medium voice. Talking on phones is absolutely forbidden. And I remember, I think I've told the story before, I was taking an American lawyer who had flown in to talk to a bunch of people on a legal matter on a train that was going out into the countryside, and he got a call on the train, and he basically started pacing up and down the train on the phone, speaking loudly and profanely. And he was from Long Island, so he sounded like a Sopranos guy ordering a hit on a bunch of people. It was almost what he was actually doing, speaking very loudly. And the looks that I got for like not controlling my guy, it was clear that he was a tourist, and people were like giving him dirty looks, and he was completely oblivious. So then they looked at me, and maybe they could tell that I was feeling awkward, and so everybody started to focus in on me. And when we got off the train, he was like, yeah, was that not allowed? Was there a problem with what I was just doing? And I was like, kinda, yeah, I didn't tell you about that, but yeah. It was kind of entertaining to watch. It was like being in the middle of a Sopranos episode. Yeah, where I was getting all the death looks from the way that he was behaving. But anyway, behaviors to avoid on trains in Japan. I guess we've all been there. Believe in yourself. Good to see you. Yeah, Merry Christmas. Did drink on the train home from Tokyo at the same time as Japanese fellow across from you. The hangover from the welcome party almost killed you. Yeah, people do it. So that is a thing that happens, and definitely most of my foreign friends do that. Degens Konto, good to see you. The communal newspaper thing definitely used to happen in Sweden as well. Nice scenario before smartphones. Indeed, that's right. You don't really get that anymore, but it definitely used to be a thing. What is with the where is the annoying pulling the snot up? I don't understand. Pulling the snot up. I don't understand what you mean by that, and I get a feeling I don't want to know. Best worst chance story. I don't have a best or worst one. For whatever reason, it hasn't really happened to me very much. I think in my whole time here, I think I've seen one case where I was pretty sure that was a chikan. He was trying to make a move on a woman in a short dress who was like, and I was between him and the woman, and when I sort of saw what he was doing, I kind of tried to like passive aggressively block him, and when I did that, he tried to subtly but really forcefully really jab me out of the way. I kind of held him up long enough that at the next station she like made a run for it, and I think she knew what was up, and he'd really managed to shove his way past me. And I was like, and I must admit I was kind of so shocked. And when you see a situation like that, it wasn't in retrospect it was clear, but it wasn't like, how clear does it have to be? It was clear that he was trying to get to be beside this woman, and he was being like pretty much violent towards me. But there again, I'm on myself on the way to work, and you don't want to start something if you're not like 100% certain, and you always have that little bit of doubt. But in retrospect, I've seen it, and if you talk to any woman in Japan, foreign or Japanese, it's almost 100% they've encountered this. Men just live in a dream world where we don't even notice this most of the time. It's amazing how many men are just terrible people that do this. So yeah, that's the only story I've gotten. It's not much of a story, and but yeah, it is a thing. It's not listed in the list of annoying behaviors. I guess there's more along the line of irritations, but yeah, there are posters as well about passengers, please don't be violent towards train employees, and of course there are lots of chikan grouper posters as well. So I guess they categorize that differently, but that is certainly a thing. Aaron, guilty of drinking beer on long train rides up to Hakuba, but they were family empty trains. Yeah, I think in the right situation, if you're like in a box or like a group of seats or whatever, and it's like those long things, and people have bentos with a beer, and geez, they sell beer on the train in those circumstances. In fact, even on the Shinkansen, I can remember on my first trips in Japan, Oji-san sitting next to me would strike up a conversation and buy me a beer and like the dried squid and say, hey, let's tell me about the world. They'd start a you scare Maizawa. Hey, does it work in space? Kind of conversations. I'd have these over and over again. They'd always buy me beer. So I guess it is actually normal in some situations, but not on like the freaking subway, please. So yeah, no, totally. I think that's fine. Aaron, big of you to admit it, however, and I think it's okay in those sort of situations when you're taking those long trips. But yeah. So yeah, next story. Interesting one here. HPV vaccines. The government is about to allow free vaccines to women for the first time since 2005, I think. I'm sorry, for women born between 1997 and 2005. So there's an interesting thing with the whole HPV thing in Japan. Japan's hesitancy around vaccines, in part, I mean, the classic example of this was the HPV vaccine. There's this thing, the whole gynecologists and obstetricians like union of doctors in Japan, it's amazing how they are almost like campaigning against good health for women. And it's like, just like for example, they're trying to make the $7 abortion pill cost over $1,000 in Japan, the same cost as actually getting an abortion surgery from them. It's almost like, they're more afraid of the income that they're going to lose from performing abortions than they are concerned about the health of their patients. With HPV as well, it's almost like they want them to get cervical cancer, and that they, it's strange that when you have a simple, effective vaccine that can address at least HPV, which the other big thing, which I'm going to get to in a moment, of course, HPV is not something that only women get. Men get it as well. But of course, it has the side effect of being a major trigger of cervical cancer for women. So women are vulnerable to men, or to getting it from men or from women. And there was the vaccine is free and it's effective and it's widely available, and in most countries it's pretty common for among routine vaccine shots that people get. Measles, mumps, rubella, HPV is pretty normal in a lot of countries now. Japan, they started doing it, and apparently there were a couple of stories about a couple of bad reactions to it, like within the sort of statistical what you would expect for sort of negative reactions to vaccines. And apparently doctors' associations and the Ministry of Health just decided to stop the whole thing. They stopped pretty much promoting it and making it available. And the story about one or two, frankly, kind of isolated, I mean, within the thresholds that you would expect for any vaccine sort of coming up and scaring everybody, spooking everybody from this, was the hesitancy around Japan's unique level of hesitancy around something as simple as the HPV vaccine was seen as being the big danger about the coronavirus vaccine thing, that Japanese people are really, really overly cautious when it comes to vaccines and avoid it. And it's interesting that finally, after 2 years of the government trying to promote and successfully promoting people to get coronavirus vaccines, with all the pros and cons of that, they're now finally restarting the cervical cancer preventing HPV vaccines. What's interesting is that they're making it free, but they're basically promoting it as being only for women. Part of the reason for this is that the vaccine is not called HPV vaccine in Japan. It's called the cervical cancer prevention shot, which makes it sound like it's only for women, even though, of course, the whole risk for women of getting HPV is that they'll get it as an STD from men, but yet they're only promoting the vaccine for women. I mean, it's great that anyone can get it, and it's great that the Japanese government is making it free and promoting it at last after all these years of the government really meaninglessly stopping it. So baby steps, it's progress. But it is funny, it's another one of these cases where it is a woman's health problem, but it's often caused by men. And yet they're putting all the responsibility for addressing it on women. I mean, it's like a lot of other things. It is still wrongly headed, but it is progress. So I guess we'll take what we can get everyone normalized on that, and then perhaps, I mean, boys should be getting it as well. So anyway, it is a good thing, and it shows that frankly, this is always the example of where Japan does badly on vaccines. So it shows that perhaps Japan's revisiting that, which is a good thing. But that is that. Yesterday, the James Webb Space Telescope got launched yesterday. For me, I do like to tune into the live launches of rockets, but this was one I really wanted to watch. I mean, it's either the most important space experiment, scientific instrument ever, like in the history of mankind, frankly, putting this thing into space. So either you're going to see this historic launch of this telescope, or you're going to see the most expensive explosion ever. That's $10 billion worth of stuff in a single rocket, basically surrounded by explosive and being fired into space. So either way, it was kind of worth watching, and thank heavens the launch was successful. But the point is that, of course, because of the way this enormous telescope had to be packed into the spaceship, and the distance that they are putting it in, this particular way that they're putting it in space to make sure they're going to be able to get the first light in the entire universe, means we've now got 2 weeks of basically like a Rube Goldberg machine of things that have to happen to get this thing deployed and working and functioning. And any single step can ruin the whole thing for the next 2 weeks. So that's why they call it the 2 weeks of terror. For the people working on this project, who have been working on this project, I believe, since the late 1980s, some people have spent their entire lives just working on this, or their entire working lives just working on this telescope. I imagine there's a lot of people not sleeping for the next 2 weeks that are going to be working on this. But there again, it'll take 2 weeks to get the thing fully deployed, and it'll be something like 6 weeks before it'll start like being able to take images. Something very much to look forward to there. I mean, just when you think about the jump that the Hubble Space Telescope provided, the idea that we'll be able to actually directly image like planets around other stars, the idea that we'll be able to see the universe is 14 billion years old, and we can see galaxies up to 13 billion light years away, i.e. by their distance and the time it took the light to reach us, things that were basically like around when the universe was 1 billion years old, and we think we can get the extra 1 billion years and be able to see to the very first galaxies and stars in the entire universe with this. We'll be able to basically see the beginning of the universe with this, and we'll be able to see, hopefully, most of the finite universe that currently exists. I mean, it's just crazy what this is going to enable, and how much it's going to help us solve about our understanding of physics and where we come from and how the universe works, as well as, no doubt, the number of mysteries, probably more mysteries, it's going to add on top of what it solves. So exciting. So much exciting stuff with space at the moment. Actually, I went and kind of for a little self-Christmas present, I ordered 2 things this week. I ordered a t-shirt from the Anton Petrov channel. He's like this very nice Canadian-Russian man. He's like a school teacher who just covers scientific papers, mostly about space and science. I love the way he presents. He says, "Hello, wonderful people," every video, and just to support him, like he asked people to support him by buying a t-shirt. So I bought one of his t-shirts. I'm looking forward to getting that. I will wear it proudly on the show. The other thing is I got a 3D printed version of the Rocket Lab Neutron rocket, which just looks like that Bond rocket where the sort of the fairing opens up, and in the Bond movies it would like capture satellites. This will be to release, but it's this amazing New Zealand space company that is just doing crazy cool stuff as well with space, and soon you'll see that in the background. I've got a Starship over here right now. Whoops. So I'm going to get a 3D printed version of the Neutron rocket, which is also a cool looking rocket, and that will sit behind me in future videos. So a lot going on that's cool with space, but this is the coolest thing. This is super cool. Again, this video will start playing if I open this up, so I'll show it and then I'll go back. This series from Extra Credit, with these kind of cute animations and great storytelling that they do about all sorts of different history from all around the world. They're doing a feature right now on the rise of Japanese militarism up to World War II. And it's a really not well understood topic, even in Japan, and it's really complex and really nuanced. How Japan went from Meiji, how it became democratic at the end of Meiji, the Taisho democracy, the old Japanese constitution, how pro-military factions, and how there were all these attempted coups and assassinations, and how Japan went through all of this still being quite democratic and without the military taking over for quite a long time, but how there was this sort of creeping the dynamics in the society about why people trusted the military more than the elected politicians, how the elected politicians and even in the head of the military were pro-America and were against joining the Axis, and and how it was sort of the Young Turks and the army who messed things up. Episode 3 out of, I think, 5 on the rise of Japanese militarism, including these young officers in Manchuria and the trouble that they made to basically deliberately stage incidents as a causa belli, as a cause for war. to go and invade China and so on. But so many fascinating nuances, and it's really hard to tell story. And this channel just tells history so well. They tell it like is really compelling, easy to understand stories. And they'll do an episode at the end called a Lies episode, where they'll go into a lot of the nuances that they skipped over, and they'll explain at length, okay, we had a word limit, we had to simplify this part of the story, but actually this is what happened. It is one of my favorite channels on YouTube, Extra Credits. And this series on Japanese militarism is, the way it's told and how clear it is and how easy to understand and compelling it is as a story. It's just brilliant. Can't recommend it enough. If you, even if you're not into Japanese history or whatever, I'd recommend this. This is something that, in America and in Japan, people don't realize. It's fantastic the nuances that they go into. Why would Japan go and do something dumb like attack America like it did? And how did the military in Japan become in a position to influence Japan the way that it did and take it in that direction? Two things I find super interesting about that time, by the way, which led to public support for the fascists and the militarists that went and did all these horrible things. Two things that people in the West don't really know about at all. One was, of course, the 1919 League of Nations Charter, where Japan campaigned to have a clause on universal racial equity inserted in that. Some would say cynically for its own interests, so that they could be treated the same as white people, and not really for the interests of colonized peoples in Africa and India and so on. But some people in Japan would say that was exactly what it was for, to put in a principle of racial equality. And it was shut down by America and UK and South Africa and Australia because they wanted to protect their racism and their colonialism, specifically, and they shut it down. And that triggered a lot of resentment and a lot of backlash again and mistrust in the ability of politicians to be able to achieve equality for, it generated support for militarists that said that, we failed, we're not going to convince white people to behave reasonably. This was part of it. And then in the 1920s and 30s, when California and the United States started putting in racist laws against Japanese specifically, this was stuff which caused a backlash, which caused anti-American and pro-military sentiment in Japan as well. That caused support for things like Pearl Harbor. Again, the factors, and there are so many factors, both the adventurism and, the sort of pure war of aggression part on the Japanese part. But we always when we're telling history, we tend to tell history where we glean over the parts that make the story nuanced or rough it up and don't make it so clean from the perspective of the victors. But these were things that played significant impacts into the public support for Japanese kicking out colonial powers from Asia, which included America at that time as well, of course, and the Philippines. So, none of it being a justification, of course, for the terrible things that Japan did with that, and indeed the terrible things that even without that they were doing, including that these factions that were taking this public popularity were assassinating democratically elected prime ministers and politicians and doing multiple coup attempts and so on in Tokyo. I mean, they were scumbags. But to understand all the dynamics of all the things that were happening around that time is so hard to describe, and the story does it well. It gets a lot of those sort of details out that people just don't know, and it lets you understand the picture so much better. Anyway, that's the advertisement for that. It is a fantastic podcast in general, and these episodes are great. That is all of my topics. Thank you, Aaron, once again for providing the link and being an awesome moderator all year. Really, really appreciate actually all the support that you've done for the channel. Mitchell Atlas, excellent to see you. RE HPV vaccine. In US, the vax is recommended only up through age 26. Reasoning is that people will have already been exposed to HPV by that age. A little presumptuous indeed. And by the way, great to see you in the comments. Sainted Sir, excellent to see you. I'm going to go do a final scan through the comments. Joe Smith, do I feel the Japanese treated the Koreans unfairly? That is such a loaded and such a big... I mean, did the Germans treat the... that's also a minefield. If you ask the Koreans, they would say certainly not, and they certainly have a big say in the matter. So, you got the British looking at the British Empire, saying, why are they complaining about us? What have the Romans ever done for us? Skit on the life of Brian, where the Brits still feel deep down like the Africans and the Indians should be appreciative for all the the good things that the British Empire did, like the Roman Empire did. But it's very much the same story with Japan. A lot of Japanese people feel like Koreans should appreciate them for what they brought to Korea, and they did invest an awful lot into Korea, making it, integrating as part of regular Japan. But of course, there's a lot of suffering in Korea and a lot of abuse of Korean people, of course. So no one can answer that, but yeah, big credit for asking a simple question. It's a very, very difficult question. I mean, it's like asking, do people overall? No. Japan colonized Korea and it didn't want to be colonized. So just from that principle alone, everything that stems from that, even with good intentions, even if there are instances of fair things, if it was based upon a foundation of unfairness, Japan had no right to colonize Korea. So you'd say no, stemming from that. But, at the same time, really, really complicated topic there. So there you go. You know what? Cervical or cervical, I don't even know. And that's terrible as well. Ferrari thief. So thank you for calling me out on that. You are correct, and if someone can actually put in the correct pronunciation. I remember in New Zealand there was a big thing. There was a big news story around this when I was a kid. They call it, like, I heard it as almost like cervital, but I think maybe it was a hard C. I don't know. I should know, but I don't. Just scanning through final round of topics. Again, if you've joined and you've been watching, please say hello. Happy New Year to everybody. What I get, you know what? This is the final show for the year. It just occurred to me. Quint Rankid, so they failed to convince people to treat the races equally, and somehow this led to becoming allied with one of the most racist regimes ever. Well, indeed, that was one of the. But this is also why. Well, no, but actually, Quint Rankid, that's exactly the point. The idealists who tried to get the 1919 League of Nations racial equality thing in there were pro-West and pro-America, and it was the Young Turks who basically said that America and Brits and are hypocrites and they're stabbing us in the back and we should team up with Germany and go and do our own thing. It was the Young Turks that wanted to align with Germany, and in Japan there was an intense debate. The liberal politicians, who were basically the ones who kept getting assassinated by the military factions, were the idealists who went for the League of Nations racial equality charter, and they lost credibility through Australia and England basically torpedoing the the sort of racial equality thing. So they totally were willing to become enemy of my enemy is my friend and team up with the Nazis over that. And there were a lot of misgivings over the Nazi alliance from the aristocracy elites that were pro-Western. And remember, Japan was an ally of Britain in World War I, and before that, actually, under Meiji, was a major ally of Britain. Remember, Japan doing a number on Russia was partly because of British support. In fact, in a huge amount. So really complicated. So not simple at all. So the point is, Japan is not a single thing. That's the point. There are different people here, and it's really complex and nuanced. There are so many factions running around, which is why I find this history so fascinating, and why, if you don't know that, you should watch these videos, because they really convey that really, really well. Anyway, One Johnson, have a great end of year. Yeah, I was just wrapping up, and then something very squirrel. But yes, will I do a show next week or take a break? Yeah, I've got nothing better to do. I'm probably going to do a New Year's show next year. I guess we'll do a look back on 2021, and I look forward to 2022. I'm an optimist. I think it's always getting better. So yeah, welcome to everybody. Cervical, thank you for the correction. The Linksy Project, excellent to see you there in the chat. Great to have you. Happy New Year. Hope there's buttered toast and cocoa in my future. There indeed is, and as I hope there is for everyone else. Have a great week. Hope that you're able to, obviously a lot of people not able to travel and be with their loved ones at the moment the way that they want to, I know, but do take care of yourselves. Of course, it is a scary time at the moment with the pandemic ramping up again. So stay home, stay safe. Check out my Twitter if you want to interact with me during the week. And yeah, look, I guess I'll see you next year. I'll see you on the next show, which will be, indeed, it will be January 2nd, next show. So I'll see you then. Take it easy, though. Remember, have a good break, and see you later. Boom. Peace. I said it would be a quick show, and as usual, it is over now, but what can you do? It gets a lot of stuff to talk about. Quint Ranked, yeah. Well, even the phrase is horrible. South Africa used to do that with New Zealand rugby teams, by the way. They would allow New Zealand to have 2 Maori players, which they would call honorary white people when they would travel to South Africa, and that was horrible. But the fact that the New Zealand rugby team went along with it was even worse, actually. But yeah. Milk up, bulk up indeed. Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year, everybody, indeed. Best wishes, wishing everyone a fantastic 2022, which you'll get to spend with me. And yeah, have a great end of year break. I'm going to say goodbye now. But have a good one, everyone. Boom. Peace. Barry Bonds, glad you can make it. And peace indeed. Have a good one. Ending show.